cross. It's the texture of God. Lift your head like me. You got to wear your collar with dignity. How it was I said, sing it along. Say, I'm black and proud. It's high time that we get rid of that old slave mentality.
Oh, and a very good evening to you, and welcome to Politics 101, Wednesday night, Wednesday night, Wednesday night, and we are dedicating Wednesday nights to Black people business exclusively, starting today, um, because we don't want it to get smothered and mixed up with other things, because these are crucial times. Good night to those of you joining us from London, uh, from Europe. Good evening to those of you joining us from Guyana and the Eastern Caribbean, the Caribbean in general, and to those of you who are joining us from North America. Good evening. Good afternoon to those of you in the West Coast of the United States. Those of you who are joining us from Arizona and California in particular. Good evening to all of you joining us from Guyana. Mortimer is joining us from Firish. Firish, of course, is one of our ancestral spaces. Tonight, we're going to be talking with Chief Eric Phillips. Um, those of you who've been following the newspapers um, would have seen Eric writing a couple of treaties, and they call them letters. I call them treaties. Um, on the question of reparations, Eric, of course, is a vice president of the Caribbean Reparations Committee, and he's, of course, chairman of the Reparations Committee in Guyana. He's also a leading member of AGDA and one of the leading spokespersons um, on the African condition and the notion of African liberation. Uh, we came in with some steel band music from the Buxton Pride Steel Orchestra, playing there on the 31st of July at Buxton. Group of young people who are engaged in steel pan. As you know, the steel pan is the most recent musical instrument, and it was created right here in our Caribbean, Trinidad and Tobago. Those oil drums brought in oil for the soldiers. As you know, the Americans had bases, military bases all over the Caribbean, all over the world. I think there are over 300 and something of those bases, if I think, but the one in Trinidad. And of course, we had one in Guyana. And I think the Americans still control the Atkinson Field. That's where the old airport used to be. Um, and of course, in Trinidad, Sparrow made his name, the mighty Sparrow. Jean and Dinah, Rosita and Clementina. And of course, Brother Sparrow, Brother Sparrow was speaking there um, about about prostitution during the war. Rum and Coca-Cola. You know, and wherever the Americans went, there was prostitution. And like I said, those oil drums oil, brought in oil for the military operation. And the Trinidadians, in particular, those poor Trinidadians up in Laventille, the hill there, um, decided that they recognized that if you were to apply heat to the pans, you could create an instrument. And they did. David Rudder celebrates it in The Hammer. I wonder where the hammer gone. The founder of the steel band, and he was singing, about him. And so steel band is essentially Caribbean, and it's good to see the youngsters involved in that art form. And I've been talking here about um, looking after our young people. People come and tell me, look, them by smoking dope, them by this, they're putting a light in the air. And I am saying, but those boys are our boys. Those girls are our girls. And there's something that we didn't do. A young person with us in Buxton wanted us to talk about that during the emancipation celebration observances. And I didn't feel that was the time to talk about it. There are factors that have contributed to our young people, especially our young Africans. But they're bad boys and bad girls, quote unquote, in other ethnic groups, perhaps worse than Africans. And we have to think about what we want to do. And that is why I am saying, as we go into these elections, the parties are going to have their manifesto. But I am interested in coming up with a Black manifesto, an African Guyanese manifesto for the coming elections. An African Guyanese manifesto for the coming elections. See, we have to fight at the party level, but the party level is not always, in fact, it seldom is the race level. It seldom is the race level. Parties want to win vote and win election, and if they have to do that at the expense of their own base, they will do it. And so I think as African Guyanese, we have to fight at the political level. And you all know where I stand on that. But we also have to fight at the ethnic level, because beneath the politics, or wrapped up with the politics, is a game plan to cripple African Guyanese, economically, politically, socially, culturally. And they have some fellas over there. They used to call themselves Roar. Back in the day, they used to believe in power sharing. Eric Phillips, myself, Rafi Dev, all of us, Aubrey Norton, Vincent Alexander, Takumo Gonse, all of us used to say power sharing, the end of winner take all politics. All the ethnic groups should be represented at the table. Back in the day, Rafi Dev and Roar were big in that. But the day we found oil and the PPP is in power, they're no longer power sharers. They don't want Indian and Africans to share power because of the oil. They don't want us to share in the oil revenue. They have now degenerated into a bunch of angry, racially insensitive old men. And they have given up on sharing power between Indians and Africans. Ravi Dev, Beto Ram, Ramarak, and them, they have given up on that. They've come up with this nonsense about crossover votes. And the crossover vote story is a cover for the PPP to go into African communities, raid those communities, and then suppress them. The old tactic of the slave owners. And then they got some slave catchers in the African Guyanese community, but they got some of them in the parties. When Brother Ogunse got locked up, one of them, my dear sister, Gita, came out and condemned, and I said, hello, hey, you are not going to catch an African and turn him over to the PPP. No. And so I introduced the term slave catcher. Angry. They're angry. I call them Indian women slave catchers. They've always been slave catchers. Eric Phillips is going to talk about back in the day when our Amerindian brothers and sisters were slave catchers. In fact, history might have been different because Kofi and his band were able to cross over into Demerara and Essequibo. Our history would have been different, but our Amerindian brothers and sisters blocked them, catch them. The notion of slave catching, we have to face it as Guyanese. Eric Phillips points out, has been pointing out, he's been a lone voice that look, contrary to what we are saying, you know, there's this thing among black people, especially the black political leaders. Oh, well, black people doing bad, but what about our Amerindian brothers? They're also suffering. And what about our Indian brothers and there? But of course they're suffering. But the suffering of Africans is a different kind of suffering. We have never been compensated. Our Indian Guyanese brothers and sisters were compensated. Our Amerindian brothers and sisters have been compensated. Have they been compensated enough? No. You can never compensate people enough for genocide, which was carried out against the Amerindian people, and a bigger genocide against Africans. But Amerindian people get something. African people don't get anything. In come the pot salt, Ravi Dev, and you know what he's doing? Oh, what the Amerindians got was not reparations. He's trying subtly, and not so subtly, to put a division between us Africans, we Africans, and the Amerindians. So you want to paint Brother Eric as being anti-Amerindian, but tell you, Ravi Dev, you're up against some strong black men and women. Strong. And we're going to beat you back. This time we call you out. Ravi, you know I like you. But you're taking a lot of liberty in these times. And we're going to beat you back. I'm serious. This nonsense that you're going on with, always trying to think that you can direct black people. Anyhow, Ravi, you got warning. You got warning. Stop it. Stop it. You are the ideologue for the PPP. We peep your card. And you use the Guyana Times in your name and also without your name to piss on black people. And I'm tired of it. I'm tired of it. Stop it. Very good night.
Good night, Chief Uhuru. Good night, my brother.
It's good to have you. And you've been in the firing line. Ravi and his sidekick, Betoram Ramarak, they've come after you.
And Kisoon.
And Freddie Kisoon. He's less sophisticated,
yes,
but he is as vicious as the others. They've come after you because you have made the argument for African reparations. And your central thesis is that reparations are not alien to Guyana, not alien to Guyanese. You're making the point that reparations are due from the Europeans. And because of the work that you and others have been doing, the Europeans have begun to shift. Mm-hmm. But you are also arguing correctly that the slavery state, which inherited the assets, and the liabilities of the slave state. And they owe us reparations. Because after emancipation, they did not stop enslaving us. We've been teaching our people what they've done to us, to the point now where other groups have wealth accumulated over time, over generations, to pass on. And in a capitalist society where you need capital, because we don't have generational wealth, we don't have liquid capital to pass on. And so we are left out. We are left out of the economic motion. And you are arguing reparations were given to Amerindian brothers and sisters. We're not saying that it was wrong to give them reparations. That's not what you're saying. You are saying, and you'll have a chance to correct me, you're saying they got reparations for genocide against them. There's a higher form of genocide against African Guyanese, and we have not had reparations. Eric Phillips, I don't want to put money in your mouth, Chief. I don't want to put words in your mouth, Chief. So speak for yourself.
Thank you, my brother, and you're so correct. And I'm thankful that you're having these Wednesday evenings with reparations, because it's Black people business, and none of the political parties want to talk Black people business. The Amerindian Act of 2006, under any definition, is a reparatory justice act. And at the time, there were only 35,000 Amerindians in Guyana. Now we have 204 Amerindian groups because of how the Amerindian Act of 2006 is designed. Any group of Amerindians over 25 can form a new group. We have 204 Amerindian groups who are benefiting from the Amerindian Act of 2006, not only in terms of land, but in terms of carbon credit. They just got $20 million each. There's also an Amerindian Development Fund. There's also a Toshaus Council. There's also a Ministry of Amerindian Affairs. And if you look at the budget, you're talking hundreds of billions of dollars. Now, David, 3 of those 9 groups were not here when we were brought here in the 1620s. The Waiwais came here 200 years after we were here. They're Brazilians. The Makushis and the Wapishanas came here 100 years after we were here. They were not here during the 1763 war. They all drifted from Brazil into Guyana, and they are 3 of the 6 groups who have gotten reparations under the Amerindian Act of 2006. Also, David, and this is very significant, I just want to make a small correction. There was very little Amerindian genocide in Guyana, unlike the rest of the Caribbean and Latin America. The British and the Dutch partnered with the Amerindians to police us, to hunt us down, to kill us. And indeed, you're right. If it wasn't for the Caribs blocking coffee from going from Berbice to Demerara and Essequibo, the 1763 rebellion would have been different, our history would have been different. And by the way, David, we have some Maroons from the 1763 called the Quinties who escaped to Suriname. And I tried to bring them here for emancipation, and Ramson blocked it, even though it's coming out of the reparation budget, because they don't want that history to be told and taught, because they don't want people of Indian descent to know the true history and to know the suffering we went through. And that's why the 1823 bicentennial, which should have been a massive celebration and commemoration in Guyana, was squeezed. Because they don't want Indo-Guyanese and the others to know that we were here far before them, and that 473,000 Africans died to build Guyana. We cleared 15,000 square miles.
Repeat that number.
473,000 Africans died to build Guyana over 200 years. We cleared 15,000 square miles. You and I are not saying that. That's the Venn Commission report. And in that report, it said we moved 100 million tons of earth with our hands. We cleared 9 million hectares of land. And so all of this history is being hidden. That's why history is not being taught in the schools. And I just want to make one other clarifications about Amerindians. They like to say Africans sold Africans. Well, there is an extensive document, and I'm willing to share it, that shows that the Caribs and the Arawaks attacked other Amerindian groups in Guyana before we were here, killed the men and women, killed the men, and sold the women and children into servitude. But they were not strong enough to do the work needed. And this is a document that's written by Whitefield and the late Sister Menez. It's extensive, and all of this is hidden. So there was no genocide, one. 3 of the 9 groups weren't here before us. And they were the ones who first attacked other Amerindian groups and sold them to the Dutch and the British, but primarily the Dutch. Now, Kwamina was shot in his back by an Amerindian. We don't want to talk, it's not me saying anything about against Amerindians, it's our history. And until we know our history, our thesis will not be fully understood by our people. We're basically saying 3 things. The Amerindian Act of 2006 is a reparatory justice act in any way, shape, or form. Secondly, their reparations is due for enslavement. And the enslavement was in the state of the Dutch and British state, which now is the Guyana state. And also the Amerindian Act of 2006 wasn't given by the British or the Dutch. It was given by independent Guyana. And therefore, since we deserve reparations more than anyone else, and we know how many people died and what we did, and that 3 of the 9 groups were not here before us, that we deserve reparations. And we deserve reparations to the tune of 15,000 square miles. Because that's what's measurable. Now, another thing I'd like to bring up, David, because I'm glad you're bringing up this. Our villages are at risk of 2030 because of the IPCC report on climate change, where Georgetown is going to be underwater. And this is why reparations is so urgent for people of African descent in Guyana. We need the land to move elsewhere. Otherwise, all of our heritage villages along the East Coast will be destroyed, as some were in 2005 when we had just 2 weeks of rain. So you can imagine Georgetown under 12 feet of water, what that will do to all of our villages, because the whole East Coast is fractured. And that's why this government is talking about Silka City, and that's why they're building a new capital for Guyana at Lenora. I'm just talking facts. Go over to Lenora and you see what's going on. They got hospitals, they got malls, they got water treatment plants, they got a city that's bigger than Georgetown. And we have to, as Black people, look out for Black people, because none of the politicians will. I've not heard any of the leadership of the PPPC, the APNU, the AFC, and all the other smart parties talk about the pending destruction of African villages by 2030. And I tracked that with the IPCC. Nothing has changed. It's gotten worse. We're getting worse hurricanes, earlier hurricanes. We're getting drought. We're getting fires all over the states, tornadoes. It is going to happen. So there's an urgency for people of African descent to start going to the courts if necessary, if Parliament don't want to provide reparations, to get our reparations. And even if it has to go to the CCJ, I know we will win. Now, the government of Guyana, current government of Guyana, isn't interested in that. They're basically saying to me, focus on reparations from the British and Dutch. And that's true. We also need to focus on the British and Dutch. And according to the Brattle report, and this is one of the most qualified groups in the world to do this assessment, the Dutch owe people of African descent in Guyana $50 billion, and the British owe us $3 trillion.
Chief,
3 trillion.
Chief, repeat those numbers and repeat them slowly.
The Dutch owe people of African descent in Guyana $50 billion.
And this is US money.
Yes.
Yes.
The British owe us $3 trillion.
And this is
That's
US
3,000
money.
billion
And this is US money.
US money. This is all documented. The reports are here. That report was sent to the president and government of Guyana by the former ICJ judge, Patrick Robinson, who's Jamaican, who was responsible for getting this battle report done. In that battle report, 31 countries owe $107 trillion. Loss of life, loss of income. 35% of all female slaves were raped. So there's sexual harm.
Chief, we in class here tonight. You're doing the role of chief, but you're also the wise man here. So you all hear the big money that is owed to us. How they calculate it, Chief? Go slowly. Loss of life,
loss of
etc.
lives, right? Loss of income,
harm,
right? Sexual abuse,
and
the only thing they couldn't capture was psychological harm,
right?
Which is the mental slavery we have today,
right?
And they took all of the tables. This is a group that when a plane gets shot down in Libya, the government calls them in to do the valuation. These numbers are not questionable. These are the best of the best, the Brattle Group, and you can Google it, Brattle, the Brattle Group. You'll see the report, or I could provide it to you. And perhaps, David, you need to have a little, space where we could send documents for your listeners to go find them. Because I'll send you that document with the Arabs and the Amerindians killing their own people and selling them, and then killing us and being policemen for us, for the Dutch and the British, as well as the Brattle Report, as well as the 10-point plan, as well as the AU agreement we have with CARICOM and Africa Union to work together next year. There's so many things going on. But I want to focus on us.
Yes.
By 2030, we're going to be in deep trouble in all of our villages. By 2030, if there is no shared government in 2025, people of African descent will own less than 2% of this economy. Nigel Hines, 4 years ago, in an article said that the government should treat each other fairly. You could Google that. Said that right now, 85% of all the assets and wealth in Guyana belongs to PPP and their supporters, whether it's the Portuguese or Chinese or whoever. Now, look at what has happened since then. Oil. Our GDP moved from $6,000 to $20,000. Our budgets moved from 2021 from $353 billion to $558 billion to $859 billion to $1.167 trillion. Next year, it's probably going to go up by another 30%. 70 to 80% of that money is procurement. Building roads, building this, procurement. We are not part of that. So all that wealth that's being transferred isn't coming to us. So in essence, we're getting worse and worse and worse. And you could see it. And when you add that, the squeeze of all the sectors of the economy where people of African descent are in, teaching, etc., we are getting squeezed politically, economically, socially, psychologically, and culturally, as you saw with emancipation. And this is the fastest growing economy in the world, and we're losing space faster than anyone else. Now, people like to say that the Amerindians are poorer than us. That's madness. They own 18% of Guyana. That's land, that's wealth. That could be collateralized. That has minerals. It has all sorts of things in it. So our ignoramuses, many of them in our own political parties, love to say that. For example, when the Amerindians were given carbon credits by Vice President Jaglio, the HES money, our opposition went out and said, we salute it, but it's not enough. Well, where did carbon credits come from? Under the LCDS program. What is LCDS about? It's about mitigation, it's about adaptation. Therefore, our villages that are exposed to 2030 should be getting carbon credits. They should all be named heritage communities. I just saw South Africa had 9 sites being named yesterday.
Yes.
Barakara, Victoria, they should all be named heritage villages. Even the church, the Guyana Congregational Church, with
Yes.
all of the things it did during the village movement. We have an incredible story for UNESCO heritage, but no one here is interested. That has to be a government initiative. But I've started that connection when I was in Geneva with UNESCO. I've spoken to them. So, but the bottom line is we are due reparations more than anyone else in Guyana. As a matter of fact, 46,000 British people got paid for slavery in the British Islands. 46,000. Not just the church and banks and all of that, ordinary women and children who inherited things. 46,000 Britons. And Guyana, we, out of the 20 million pounds, people who owned enslaved people in Guyana got 4.28 million. So what that translates to, because we only had 80,000 freed, is that whilst a freed African in the Caribbean on average cost 17 pounds, a freed African in Guyana cost 51 pounds. The largest payout was to the Gladstone, and he had 2,035 enslaved people in Guyana. And they were here last year. And of course, the government and I fell into disrepute in that because they wanted to make it an indentureship thing. And I said no, because they didn't come here for indentureship. So we need to educate our people about our risk by 2030, our risk in 2025 if we don't have parliamentary shared governance. Because another 5 years of what's going on here with budgets getting bigger and we getting lesser and lesser, it means we are fundamentally marginalized politically, economically, socially, culturally, and psychologically.
And it's been multiplied.
Yes.
Just as assets multiply, liabilities multiply.
Yes.
Eric, yes, go ahead. You go ahead.
I have put together, and we've spoken about this before, a document to develop a sustainable economic development plan for people of African descent in Guyana, dealing with inclusion. We've analyzed the whole market. I've looked at every single contract given out in Guyana in the last 5 years. It's barefaced. It's on the websites. It's on the public. It's just that people don't gather this information to show the exclusion. I would ask anybody listening to this call, of the 70 to 80% of the budgets since this new government is in place, name me one large contract any person of African descent has gotten. I've seen people who have never built a paving or a pavement get billion-dollar contracts to build roads. So they're including others who were not part of that sector, giving them big contracts. They can therefore go to the banks, get money, or they can go and find somebody who could really do the job, but they're getting the contracts and that 12 million, right? But we are getting nothing. Why? Because of winner take all. And because if you're not a member of the party or an acolyte or a family member or supporter, this government has fundamentally said, nothing for you. We'll squeeze you till you join us. And that's what happened to emancipation, where they're squeezing African organizations to join them by making them competitive to IFADG. It is evil. But that's the reality.
Eric, I want to go back to the 2% of the economy. I want to go back to the 2% because that is very, very instructive. And I want you to talk about how you measure the percentage of the economy that the various ethnic groups control.
Nigel Hines is the accountant, but I'll give you some insights.
Yes.
On how wealth has been changed. Take Georgetown. Before oil, what was the cost of an acre of land in Georgetown? Not much. Now an acre of land in Georgetown is 1.3 million US. We had given the David Granger presidency a proposal, Stanley Ming and I, to increase Agricola by 30 acres.
Yes.
Right? Which would have doubled the size of Agricola. Agricola has 117 house lots. Nothing happened, even though we did that and spent a lot of money doing it. Do you know, 2 weeks ago, it was advertised in the papers that warehouses in that area, 1 acre is 1.3 million US. You can go in the papers and see it. So that wealth that could have gone to Agricola by just a simple signature was denied us. But a lot of money laundering and other stuff is going on in Guyana, buying property, increasing the rate, because people forget that it's not just legal currency that's being used to boost this economy.
Mhm.
It's a lot of cocaine money, it's a lot of money laundering, it's a lot of gold smuggling, and we are not in that. So even the areas where you can go and get extra capital outside of the banking system, they're not controlled by us. We don't send cocaine submarines anywhere. Who controls the gold sector? How many licenses are there? There are 8. We have 1, right? So when you look at the assets, land grants, licenses, radio licenses, TV licenses, IT licenses,
Mhm.
telecommunications licenses,
Mhm.
when you look at all the contracts, when you look at who owns the banks, there are 6
Mhm.
banks. When you look at the growth of the banks and where that money is coming from, when you do PPP, which is parity instead of GDP, and to give you an equivalent to that, the way you look at PPP, you look at you go to the States and you buy KFC at a 3-piece. It's probably 9.99 or less, 6.99 in the
Six
US.
ninety nine. Yes.
Yeah. In Guyana, a 3-piece is almost $10.
Yes, I was that thing struck me the other
Yeah,
day.
2,000, right? A
Lord
pizza
God.
is 4,500, which is ridiculous because that's like $22 and it should be about 7.99. So, and what is worse about that is that the chicken comes from here. The chicken doesn't come from the States to justify that price. So, when you look at how wealth is sucked out from us,
Mhm.
as well as how other people are getting wealth through
Yes.
salaries,
Yes.
right? Through and this is another myth. The government talks about house lots, and they're doing a great job, even though they want disaggregated. But what about the commercial lands? You can give somebody 10,000 house lots. All you need to do is to get a Brazilian 10,000 acres that they've done to do a joint venture with the Portuguese community in here to do soya and other things. And that wipes away, that's the equivalent to the 10,000 house lots.
Mhm.
So we don't have people in the political parties who are interested in our welfare doing this type of analysis. But Nigel Hines looked at it, and what I did, I extrapolated from Nigel Hines' number. When I looked at the amount of money in the budget, amount going to contracts and construction and all of this, and who's getting these big contracts, and the value of property and all of these things. Look at it. Massey just made $1.7 billion profit.
Profit.
Yeah, 1.7 billion US. Most of it out of Guyana. You know, when you look at house prices, when you look at rental rates, when you look at the crowding out effect of Venezuelans coming in and getting cheap labor so that Africans cannot get that labor at a higher rate. Because it's the same like in dentistry. You brought in cheap labor to underpin or undercut freed African labor. So history is repeating itself, but our folks don't understand that. When you're bringing in nurses to replace our nurses, and you got to give them airfare and bring them here and house them and pay them, why not just give our nurses a better salary? They're Guyanese. So a lot of things are happening, and that's why reparations is critical to the survival of people of African descent in Guyana, as is reparations critical to the survival of Caribbean civilization. And that was said by Prime Minister Owen Arthur years ago before he died, and repeated by Sir Hilary Beckles. Because when you look at the climate exposure to Barbados and all the islands, they're all at risk for climate change. And unless you have reparatory justice to do adaptation and mitigation or do anything, a lot of them will probably end up in Guyana when they're by 2030 when these hurricanes get ridiculous. And where are African Guyanese going to be? Excluded. We're underclass. Similar to what Chetty Jagan said, that we're the bottom of the ladder. We would be beneath the bottom of the ladder.
Chief
Because there
Phillips.
is no particular group paying attention to us. And by the way, the political parties know of our plight. This is not something that they don't know. The government could look at the contracts it's giving out and say, the last 1,000 contracts we gave out, how many Africans got? 2. Something is wrong with that. Look at that document, who's who in Guyana, business. 2 companies out of that big thick book are African Guyanese. We don't have a private sector. That's why we got to go to the government for grants for emancipation. You think Diwali days go to the government for grants? Yes, they do, but they also get a lot of money for the private sector because they have a private sector to sustain them. So unless we have a private sector, and not hucksters, a real private sector that has technology, that has joint venture partnerships, that can bridge and trade with Africa. Look at the Afri-Exim Bank money. $1.5 billion for trade between Africa and the Caribbean. Guyana got $500 million for housing. We're not going to get any of those contracts. People of African descent in Guyana. And then Mark Maloney, who's white, got a $90 million contract to do a hotel in Barbados. But that money is supposed to be to stimulate trade between Africa and the Caribbean, inter-Caribbean trade, like a shipping line or something like that. But all these issues are alien to our opposition. I don't know what it is they're looking at. I don't know what it is they have to offer people of African descent or anybody, because they're not dealing with the geopolitics of oil. They're not dealing with the economic situation that's evolving in Guyana. We're a very fragile society, and no one cares about it because people are busy making money and they could always fly out.
Chief Eric Phillips here tonight on Wednesday night, which is going to be Reparations and African Guyanese night. I was called by Elder Malcolm Paris, and he said, Chief, you need to set aside one night to deal with Black people business. And immediately I said, Brother Malcolm, I am going to do it. And I contacted Chief Eric immediately. And I said, we're going to start on Wednesday, and here we are. And we want to make this, we are going to make this the Wednesday night reparations night and other African Guyanese business. So put that in your calendar. Eric, what is Ravi Dev and these guys up to? They're up to something.
You classified it carefully. Ravi Dev, Batarak, the ICDN, the Inter-Caribbean Diaspora Network. We don't read what these people write. Kisoon challenged me to prove that during the last election, they called us hungry belly dogs and said I should be ostracized because I'm bringing up race. I sent him 17 pages of these comments with pictures of the people who said it with their names on Facebook, PPPC family, and he's gone quiet. He's now gone to say something about Charles series. He said he didn't know. How is it that you are a media person and you didn't know that there was a concerted effort by outsiders and insiders to make Guyana racially divisive at the last election so that Indians would huddle and vote PPP, and we would be called monkeys and they would poison us and they'll kill us? All of these comments, I could send it to you. I sent it to the papers.
Please do. Please send it.
I sent the 17 pages to all of the papers. And they're still going at it because just last week on this website, they had a picture in black. I don't think I have it here. Burnham evil. Norton, reincarnation of evil. They got Granger with a gorilla head and a face. This is the type of thing that One Guyana is nurturing. As a matter of fact, I have a theory of who created that campaign to discredit Africans, to make us beasts of burden, and ultimately led to the deaths of the Henry brothers. Because if you read this stuff, your skin would crawl. And now we have One Guyana, which is plausible deniability. So they're thinking about holistic Guyana, but they were the ones who created the division. It's a yin and yang. I mean, I teach marketing, I teach strategic planning. That's what I would do. Create this huge racial division, nurture it, feed it, so that I can win. And then I come with something, a program that makes it look like I had nothing to do. And that's what's going on.
These types used to believe in power sharing. They
Yes.
joined us and they said, we've got to get rid of winner take all. And as soon as oil came, they switched the normal power sharing. They start to now talk about crossover vote. Talk
But
about that.
you saw what Ravi said when he's in India. It's a TV. It's on YouTube.
Yes,
You
yes,
know,
yes. And we covered
yeah.
it extensively last year.
Yeah. Well, they don't. They want to take away our rights. It's about a religious architecture. We're at the bottom of the ladder. As much as they may not want to say that, but read Kamsi Charan. Kamsi Charan was very clear, and Kamsi Charan says, "I don't know why they call Africans in Guyana black people. My grandmother blacker than most of them,
Mm-hmm,
most Africans."
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But it's this stigma. They call themselves Indians, but we're blacks. I don't know what a blacks is, but it's a disconnection from our continent. They're connected to China and India and Portugal, but we're connected to blacks,
Yes.
you know. But these guys are on a campaign to discredit us. I mean, he said that the East Indian colonization scheme was conjecture. I
Yes,
just wrote
yes,
about
yes.
it.
Oh my
Now, the
goodness.
East Indian colonization scheme went on from the 5th of December 1919 to 1929. Laku and all of them went to India several times, went to London many times. This was a proposal where Guyana was to become a colony of India. Now, here's the madness about this, David. We died, 473,000 of us died to build Guyana. Indentures are brought here for 71 years. And at the end of 71 years, they've forgotten all the debts and labor and things we did in Guyana, and they want to give Guyana to a group of Indians who came here 200 years after we were enslaved. And a lot of those lands, if you read the archives, and they're in our archives here, a lot of the acreage identified in that document are owned by Indians. I don't know how. But then you had lawyers, Laku and Hunan and all of them involved, Wharton, Hog Island, all these places were mentioned. So if we really were to do our history, and that's why they don't want to do our history. I mean, I was shocked to find out that 3 of the indigenous groups came here 100 to 200 years after. I'm not a historian. Why am I finding that out in 2015 when we got all these great historians? It's hidden, but it's in the documents. When you go and check, and guess how we found out? We're looking at YYs because one of the terms of reference was to do a corrective narrative of our history. So Jonathan Adams and I started to do it. And then we said, why is only 300 of them? There must have been a massacre. No massacre. Go through the history. They were running from the Spanish but they're running from Brazil. And they have 1 million hectares of land at the bottom of Guyana called Conishin. And they came here 200 years after we were here. The other thing, and when I was in Colombia, and we're linking to Colombia, we're linking to Brazil, I was shocked to know that 205 million hectares of land in the Amazon are ancestral lands, but that they've only gotten 9 million hectares. And that's why Franco Marquez, the vice president of Colombia, called that conference in Colombia, because COP16 is going to be held in Colombia in September, and she wants to make sure that we're not invisible. 64% of what's going on in the Amazon is managed by people of African descent, not indigenous tribes. But when you read the media, you think everything is being managed by indigenous people. There are 46 million indigenous people in Latin America and the Caribbean. There are 154 million people of African descent. And they have more rights than us because they had 2 decades and we had 1. And because people have this perception that they were decimated more than us. It's all the politics, the geopolitics. But our politicians don't even understand. If you want to get more votes from your own people, educate them about who they are.
Yeah, yeah.
That's so
It's like
basic.
pulling teeth. It's like pulling teeth.
They're running from themselves.
As you said, they must be smoking something.
Yeah.
It's like pulling teeth. And a lot of them are my friends. They're your friends. I mean, we love them. But my goodness, to get them to talk a straight talk to Black people about Black people is like asking them to commit a sin, and they're comfortable talking about Indian people or
Yes.
Amerindian people.
Yes.
Very comfortable.
Yes.
In 2024, our politicians cannot watch black people straight in their face and say, I love you.
Yes.
Oh my goodness. That thing sends me crazy, because they're weakening our people. Chief, what this thing about crossover vote that Ravi Dev and them are trying to sell to the PNC and the AFC?
There are three things they've been trying to sell, all of which are detrimental to us. The first is federalism.
Yes.
Now, if you understand Guyana, and all the politicians should, Region 4 is 989 square miles. It has almost 400,000 people. Region 9 is 1/3 of Guyana and got 40,000 people. So only a maniac or somebody very idiotic would push for federalism, because federalism says that every state would have a governor like Brazil and all the resources would be managed there. So we're in Region 4, most of us, no assets here, right? And we pack jam. But Region 9, for example, which has 20-something thousand square miles out of the 83, got just 40,000 people. So that's one of the things they're pushing. The other thing they're pushing is mixed people.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Again, the fastest growing population is mixed. There's no race called mixed. You're either Afro-descendant, Indo-descendant, or something. But they create this mythological thing called mix to confuse.
Yes.
Who's mixed? Is that an African, an Indian, or Portuguese intermarrying? So if an African marries an Indian, you're still a person of African descent or person of Indian descent. If you marry a Portuguese, but they call this thing mix to make it look like if it's some new race.
Chief, as you know, South Africa is the only place that had colored,
right,
as a race. The Americans never had no mix and all those kind of things, right?
So that's the second trick.
Yeah.
And the third trick is the one you mentioned now about crossover votes. This is an ethnic census. Winner take all is not about class, it's about race. I mean, if Rodney were alive today, he would have revisited this because he was a brilliant person. Yes. He would have reanalyzed it because of how geopolitics is playing. Where are these crossover votes coming from? The only crossover votes I see happening are if Venezuelans cross over and vote, and 120,000 of them in Guyana right now. A lot of them got IDs. So that's a risk of an unclean database at the next elections. So these three tricks are being thrown out there from time to time to confuse our politicians, some of whom adopt it.
Yes. Yes. Oh, yes.
So that it's easy to talk about mixed race than about black people.
Yes.
So I remember years ago when I was teaching at UJ, at the corner of Albert and Namaha Street, there was a shop. It was owned by an Indian family, and the daughter was blacker than me. And she was a Hindu, because I saw her coming out of the shop a Hindu. But the father was Indian, the mother was African. So is she mixed? She's a Hindu. So they get mixed up with race and religion and ethnicity and nationality and culture, because these, I call them racial entrepreneurs, the Ravi Devs. And if you read their ICDN.org, if you're talking about cyber crimes, they should be locked up for the articles they write about black people. They said Granger was a murderer, he got blood on his hand. Their Facebook page got him as a guerrilla, and they got a picture of the opposition, 4 or 5 guerrillas in the jungle. It is horrible. And you mean the ERC doesn't know about this? They know, because the website is called, the Facebook page is called PPPC Family. And it's been around since before the elections. I spent the last 2 weeks going through 6 years of it, and I was horrified.
Chief
And
Eric.
yet we lock up some, was it Adam, for cybercrime?
Yes.
But the fortunate thing is that you can call Facebook and get a history of everything on that site.
Hmm.
I don't want to get into that. I got too much more important things. But these are things that are in your face. This is what created this racially tense environment during the elections. And I firmly believe this is why the Henry brothers were murdered and mutilated,
Hmm.
because of that. And the nurse who was driving home got her car pelted. People, I will never forget the last elections. People who I taught with at UG, lecturers. I was shocked at what they have on these web pages. I don't want to raise names. I sent some of it to the media when Kissoon challenged me to show proof. These are people who are degreed. I can understand those who are uneducated,
Hmm. Hmm.
but these are degreed people, like Ravi Dev, who always got this angle. Ravi Dev has always proposed this theory that black people are inferior to Indians, and he uses it in a funny way. He thinks he's dealing with idiots.
Yes.
That you get in life what your skills are, what
Yes.
because of
Yes.
what you were imbued with.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
He always
likes,
coaches it. When you
yes.
read through everything he says, it's always about that
Yes.
Indians are superior.
Yes. The Indians work hard.
Yes.
Delayed gratification.
Yes.
The Indians are into delayed gratifications, but black people want instant gratification.
Right.
And
So we got delayed gratification for 200 years. We didn't get paid. So that's
Yeah.
real delayed gratification.
Yeah.
You see, our politicians don't even know how to answer these people when they come there. There was this lady 3 years ago came to Emancipation and asked me, I heard from Agda that African culture is dying. I said, I'm African. It looked to you like I'm dying. Is Indian culture dying? Are you dying? And she changed the question. We have to answer these people appropriately, but we don't think.
Yes. Chief Eric Phillips here tonight. Tonight is Black People Night, Africa Night, Reparations Night. We are talking strictly Black people business, and we are not hiding. We're not hiding. You know, you all know that I am a member of the WPA. They just named me as their presidential candidate. And so, in many regards, I am political in that sense, and I'm looking for votes. But I'm not mincing matters when it comes to Black people business.
David, you're being totally marginalized. You defined this about 10 years ago when you wrote that book.
Yes.
You should put up that definition of marginalization or read it one day. It's real. You have no political power. And even with emancipation, they want to take away our agency. We mustn't decide what we want to do. Somebody knows what's better for us.
Yes. Eric, this whole business of these alternative organizations, like you just said, they tried it at Emancipation. I want to talk about what they did to ACTA. I want to talk about that because sometimes we think our people get the thing done, only to find out they hear something, but they ain't get the real thing. Tell us what they did to ACTA.
Well, ACTA's been hosting Emancipation at the National Park for 31 years consecutively.
Yes, Chief Eric is back. Let me bring him back in. Yes, Eric.
So this year, an organization called APAD, which is the Association of People of African Descent, and just their name, it's a parallel organization to IPADG, right, which was set up for the decade. This group claimed that out of their own pockets, and this group is only a year old, they were going to host an emancipation event at Maltino's, which is directly across the street from Agda and the National Park. And not only would they hold it, it would be free, and they would bring in Warrior King from Jamaica. Now, I know that Agda spends 150,000 US every year minimum to hold emancipation. And they charge 200 Ghana dollars for young people, or 500 or 250 this year to cover that. Last year we had Morgan
Heritage.
Heritage. That's a big band from Jamaica.
Yes.
We got to pay for their airfare, their people. We got to pay them hotel, meals, transportation, security, bring their equipment, all of that. It's expensive to hold emancipation. They were saying that out of their pockets, they were going to hold this free concert and bring somebody from Jamaica as an artist. And they would not have, and they wouldn't collect anything. So you know that that's a lie. First of all, why would you come directly across Agda when we're paying about $800,000 to the national park? We're paying another 400,000 or 500,000 for police. So all they're doing is that we're paying the money and they're benefiting from it because they're using our stuff. But more importantly, it's an insult. And they said they wanted to create unity by bringing it across the street from us. So it was a direct attack. And we know it was government sponsored because they don't have any money. And these are new groups that Kwame and others, Kwame McCoy and others, were creating and funding. And what was interesting about it is that there are church groups in it. The same mental slaves from our enslavement period, again being used to attack us because, of course, you're Christian first and African second, and Guyanese, Christian first, Guyanese second, and African third. So it was an attack on an institution, an African institution. It was an attack on a sacred day. And it was an insult to people in the Caribbean because when I spoke to people in Trinidad and Jamaica, they were angry because they knew that this was a government-sponsored attack against people of African descent on this most sacred day. And, you know, David, we've never allowed any politician to do a speech on Emancipation Day because we wanted to depoliticize it. But now it's a big speech in front of people. And then what is distasteful, and I wrote about this, if you're going to give African organizations money, and it's not even money, because some groups get 400,000 Guyana dollars, and you're going to have them dress up like Africans and come to a place to take pictures to get that money. It reminds me of the European zoos in the 1950s in Belgium and France, where they had Africans in zoos and Europeans came and paid to see us.
Yes. And in America, at the turn of the century, remember they had that great World Fair.
Yes.
Yes, the great fair. They had African people on parade and white people standing up next to them and so on. It was to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the Louisiana Purchase.
Right. Yeah. But David, why would you do that? You don't do it to other groups.
That's right.
You don't do it to indigenous groups. You don't do it to Indian groups. And they all get money from the government for their major events. I mean, Amerindian Heritage Month, the government spends a lot of money. Diwali and all these events, I know Indian groups get money because I've been there when they come to collect it. You don't know they're getting it, but they get a lot of money from private sector. My friend, the late Yesu Prasad, used to be upset about it. I mean, that was one man that I had a great relationship with. I used to have breakfast with him once a week in his bank. And he would tell me things that made me sad. And he was sad, but he couldn't speak out about it. But so what he did, he tried to make the Indian Arrival Committee at that place near St. Rose's. He tried to make it in the image of what made sense and what had integrity and honor. But that's what they did. They tried to destroy AGDA because they say AGDA is anti-PPP, anti-government. So anybody who is not in line with your policy, you have to be excluded from this one Guyana economy.
And they cut the donation that they would give to the ministry.
Yeah, I mean, groups like your group, First of August, Tukuntu, which is a youth group that had nothing to do with politics, got nothing. And Maka, Virgin Nugent, because they're perceived to be groups that are not aligned with the PPP. It's sad. And this is the image we're giving around the world that this is one Guyana, it's inclusive. It's quite sad. It's evil, actually, when you're purposefully excluding people, but telling the world that you're not. And the world knows. I did emancipation at the American Embassy. I spoke to a few people there. They know what's going on. The diplomatic community knows what's going on. They were all there at emancipation. It's not an unknown secret. Jimmy Carter said it. The UN said it. Duodine said it. Gail McDougall said it. This is a very divided society based on race. And the winner take all is a cancer. So that's why I wrote the article that at the next elections, I hope that no party or coalition gets 49%. Because here, David, if you don't have 49%, you can't pass a budget. You can't access the sovereign wealth fund. And therefore, you have to sit down and share government from a parliamentary perspective. And if I am in that position and I needed constitutional change, I believe it's the only mechanism that could force constitutional change, because the winner, whether it's the APNU coalition or whatever, or the PPP, once they win, they're not going to change it. So you need a structural process to force change. So if no one gets 49 and you want to pass a budget, I will say to you, you want to pass a budget, let us sign a legal agreement that we will change the constitution next year, and here are the parameters. Constituency based, no winner take all, like the Uganda constitution. There's so many constitutions we could put in place overnight. But if you have a 66% threshold to change the constitution, it will never change.
Dr. Eric Phillips here, Chief Eric Phillips here tonight. And from the comments I'm reading here, you all are really into this program. Thanks to my brother Malcolm Paris, who insisted. We had started it and then we fell off. And Malcolm called me and he said, my young brother, I am asking you, please get Eric Phillips and you all start a program once a week to talk to Black people about Black people and our condition. Malcolm, my brother, thanks. And Eric, I want to thank you very much for answering the call and coming forward. And as we all know, you have the information at your fingertips. Please send us much of that information for me and I can put it in the place.
You know, David, we have to build bridges with Brazil. And I've started that. I'm in contact with the Odara Institute of Women, which is one of the largest Afro-Brazilian organizations. On May 25th this year, they had a million woman march in Brazil for reparations and social justice. And we are now working with them in some English programs, some cultural programs, etc., because they're the ones who are fighting for people of African descent in Brazil, which has over 110 million people of African descent. We don't see them in Guyana. We have a lot of Brazilians here. There are a lot of Afro-Venezuelans. I'm also starting to see more of them.
Yes.
But we have to connect. We have to connect to Ghana and Nigeria every Tuesday as part of the reconnection. I am on a conference call with several other Guyanese, with groups from all over the continent talking economics, talking culture, talking tourism, talking business. Because if we are to develop as people of African descent in Ghana, the private sector is way ahead of us. The public sector is what it is. We have to pursue the cooperative sector, which is what our ancestors did with the villages. Most people don't understand that France is a socialist country. Most of the large companies there are corps. We need to do that. Nigeria bought $40 billion in rice last year. They have a cassava shortage. We have lots of lands that are lying idle. We need to revitalize our villages. We need to remission our villages and our youth. We need to do community development through youth entrepreneurship. We need to go to our villages, look at the soil, see what is the best crop to grow it with economies of scale so we could export it. And we could, what I would call, negotiate forward. I mean, when we had the sugar crisis, I made a proposal to the government at the time, which they never understood. I said, go and find a large country like China and go into them with a 50-year agreement, and you will sell them a portfolio of products, sugar, rice, this. This way you could hide the price of sugar, which is fluctuating. So if you get a fixed price over 50 years for a bundle of products, it not only gets pre-financed, but it tells our farmers that for the next 50 years, you can grow this crop, you can improve your species, it can be more temperature resilient, and you pull it through. That's what we got to do with our villages. You know, we got a 25 by 25 agricultural program in CARICOM, you know, where they want to reduce imports by 25% by 2025. If we understood who are the buyers, and they're mainly people of African descent, we could form relationships. But because of the government interaction, we're disconnected from selling directly to our own people on the continent because of transportation and also because of lack of access. And as you said earlier, and my Nigerian said, you can't be a capitalist without capital.
That's right.
So how do
That's
you
right.
create capital? Take Linden. We sold 100 million tons of bauxite for $1. Remember, we sold it for $1. Do you know the asset that's in the ground that you could have collateralized and gotten billions of dollars for that asset in the ground? But we sold it for $1. Sometimes I wonder what planet we're on. This is simple economics. And our politicians don't understand that. Why would you sell this inventory of the best bauxite in the world for $1 when you could collateralize it?
What a question. Eric, thank you very much for coming through tonight. And God's willing and the ancestors willing, we will see you next week.
And we'll go through the status of it, because a lot of things are happening in reparations, including that Brattle report.
Yes.
Including the Colombians coming on board. There are 5 million Black people in Colombia.
Yes.
And they got lots of lands. And those lands are under threat because the cocaine guys want to get near the ocean. And, you know, you look at the Dutch apology, which we'll talk about. The Dutch got colonies in the Caribbean. Why? Because of the law of the sea. All the assets in the 200-mile EEZ. You know, and we don't understand that you can't apologize and still have colonies, because part of apologizing is non-repetition.
Right.
And none of our politicians have written the Dutch. There's 16 apologies that Guyana could be actively pursuing right now. We are not pursuing any. So I'll see you next week.
Next week, we will open up some of those issues. Thank you.
Thanks, my brother.
Very much. And to your audience, of course, thank you. Thomas Robertson out of Georgia. Thank you very much, my brother. You're a real trooper. And we continue to organize and mobilize, because that's what we are doing here every night. We are organizing, we are mobilizing. And Wednesday night, we're mobilizing Black people, as Black people. And you all know where I stand. I'm a political person, I'm a party person, but I am also African Guyanese. And I'm one political person, I'm one party person who's not going to kick Black people under the bus because they're looking for some vote from the crossover. If I had a choice between 500 crossover votes and kicking Black people under the bus, I will tell them keep the 500 crossover votes, because I ain't selling Black people down the drain. Everybody else is, and some of us are standing up. And I'm not coming to Black people and say, before I defend you or protect you or organize you, you got to promise me a vote. I'm protecting you, defending you, organizing you, mobilizing you, rub up together, because it is my historical duty. I am what you made me to be. You, Black People Force, made me to be. I would love to have you vote, but that's not my first line of action. My first line of action is when people like Ravi Dev try to reduce you all to nothing and trying to play that they're most smart and they can always trick Black people. That I and others stand up and say, Ravi, all you stop it. Stop it. Ravi, they don't like hear me say that my auntie sent me to school, because what I'm trying to tell them, black people are not damn fools. That you're coming into our communities and taking advantage of the poverty of our people. Say you're looking for crossover vote, when in effect what you're trying to do is to tie me neck. Tie me neck. And Ravi, you of all people, you know better. You know better. You know better. Stop it. Stop it, my brother. Stop it. Good night. I'll see you all tomorrow night.
If you hear that, black is beautiful. Santa Claus. Black is beautiful. It's a texture. Lift your head.